So the panel is called Moving Forward by Looking Back, and essentially those of you that read the panel description know that the topic is really about what I like to call the golden age of reprints and the golden age of collections. And if any of you are here because you are like me, you are obsessed with high quality collections of comic books and graphic novels, it is either the golden age or the poverty age, depending on your point of view, because there certainly are a lot of great books being put out by a lot of great publishers, some of whom are represented here. And I was very excited that everybody was able to join us, including our last-minute semi-surprise guest. So, in any event, let me introduce myself briefly, the panelists, and then let's get right into it. And meanwhile, while we do that, you can start seeing cumulatively how much money you have to spend to stay on top of all these wonderful collections that we are all trying to do. So first off, I'm Greg Goldstein. I'm president of IDW Publishing. IDW is fortunate to be home to 3 imprints, all of which are represented here. The first to my immediate left is the Library of American Comics. Dean Mullaney, the imprint editor, creator, guru, whatever else we have. Dean created the library for us in 2007, has since done over 100 collections of strips, many of which have been nominated for multiple awards, including some Eisners, and some of which he's won those very same Eisners, I believe 3 of them. He, of course, has a long history in comics, like most of the group up here, and I guess could certainly be credited with inventing the modern graphic novel when, in 1978, he published Saber by McGregor and Gillespie. Am I getting it? Good? All right, there we go. And everybody said nobody will ever pay $5 for a comic book. So the rest, as they say, is history along that. But of course, those of you who have been in the business a long time know that Dean's history prior to Library of American Comics is extensive, and some of the great work he did at Eclipse is really some of the most important stuff in the industry today. Miracle Man, of course, by the original writer and Neil Gaiman. If you don't know who the original writer is, you know, that's the way Marvel has to say it nowadays. Scott McCloud Zott, and I mean dozens and dozens of wonderful projects. Next to Dean is another one of our imprint editors. Scott Dunbier is well known, of course, for the artist edition series that he does with IDW. We recently, depending on, since they're all seem to be launching at the same time, we've either done our 20th or 21st book under the artist edition brand, starting 4 years ago, first with Rocketeer and continuing today. And again, I'm going to assume most of you are familiar at least with what those books look and feel like in terms of their quality. One of the questions we're going to ask Scott today is about the absolute editions, which he is really credited with co-creating while he was at DC, yet another form of archival publishing, and of course Scott's got other interesting elements to his history, including being a long-time established art dealer before he ever joined the editorial world at Wildstorm prior to coming to IDW. Eric Reynolds at Fantagraphics. Fantagraphics does some of the greatest books in our category, of course, and Eric's been there for 21 years, which I think ties him with another one of our panelists, Michael Martens. Who's got the lead there, Michael? Is that, you guys are about 21, you're about 21 years there at Dark Horse too, right?
April 94, so 20, just over 20.
All right, I think got you beat. It's got you beat, but
you'll catch up.
But I was in the distributor wars for 12 years before.
Fair enough. But you have the advantage of having a truck, but we'll get to that in a moment. We'll get to that in a moment. You know, Eric, of course, has by being an associate publisher of Fantagraphics and being involved in so many archival projects, was in fact involved in projects that did not have the benefit of some of the advantages of technology today. So we'll ask him a little bit about you know, the changes he's seen literally at his own company while we've evolved into the state of the art. Next to Eric is Pete Maresca. I think he described himself in one of his biographical renderings to me as sort of an accidental publisher, if that's if that can be said. Pete is the publisher, president, owner, and probably the scanner of the...
My son does that.
All right, well there you go. You've got some delegation going on there. Of Sunday Press, which is doing beautiful large-size, oversized reprints of classic strips. Obviously Little Nemo and Crazy Cat being some of the most obvious ones, but doing some wonderful other things, which which are a little bit, at least to me, a little bit less obvious, but clearly based on the following the books have and the rave reviews they have, clearly the readers and the fans love some of the things that Pete's doing. Also, also many Eisner nominations and certainly some wins. We've done pretty well in terms of having an esteemed panel up here. Michael Martens, who, just as he said, celebrates his 20 years of time at Dark Horse, has done sales, marketing, product development, truck driving, other things along the way. Michael's perspective is super important to me because he's not only a longtime comics fan like the rest of us, but you have to, at the end of the day, you have to be able to go out and sell these books. And I'm certainly going to be curious to hear about particularly some of the archive material that maybe people are not as familiar with as Peanuts or Spider-Man. So I'm going to be certainly curious to hear about that. I've known Michael a really long time because, as you may have heard him mention quietly up here, he was involved in the distributor wars back in the day at Capital City when there were, in fact, more than one distributors to the direct market. So anyway, his experiences, of course, is interesting and invaluable. And finally, my good friend Craig Yoe is at the end of the panel. Craig Yoe claims I rescued him from a life of depravity, and I think all I did was just make it even more depraved than it was to begin with. Craig is a longtime comic book historian and archivist and collector and fan and really has had a really interesting background, including at one point being the creative director for Jim Henson when Jim was alive and running the Muppets. And if you notice, Craig kind of looks like a Muppet, but I digress. There you go. It's your brand choice, Craig, not ours. Anyway, I am very fortunate that Craig was willing to my harebrained scheme of bringing Yoe books, because over the years Craig had thrown out a million ideas of book ideas to me and had gone the traditional route of knocking on doors and saying, would you like to publish this? And Fantagraphics had published a few, and maybe Dark Horse had published a few, and finally I said, well, why don't we just publish them all? So he said yes, and I don't think he knew what he was getting himself in for there, but in any event. Okay, so the format of the panel is, you certainly don't want to listen to me for the next 30, 40 minutes. What I'm going to do is I've got a series of questions that I'd like to present to the panelists and let them share their experiences. We'll kind of keep it freewheeling as possible. Then I will open the questions up to the audience. I'm sure you have some. And again, anybody who's been to one of the previous panels that I've done, the question that I like the most gets rewarded handsomely with the Walt Simonson Lawnmower Man portfolio.
Are the panelists eligible for that?
No, the panelists, the reason I want all the publishers here is so I could swap you guys for books later on. So we'll take care of that later. Okay. So again, I've sort of been focusing on the last 7 or 8 years of a lot of different books, a lot of different publishers saying, all of a sudden saying, now seems like a great time. And I believe a lot of that has to do with the technology, and that's not only in terms of sort of what you can do on the pre-press side, but on the press side. So Pete, tell us a little bit about sort of, because this is a technology-driven way in which you got into this.
Right. Well, I was at Apple Computer and then Macromedia working in online entertainment and games and CD-ROMs and all that stuff. And eventually that migrated into creating entertainment for mobile phones. So here I was creating for, maybe some of you might remember mobile phones where there are 1,000 different kinds of screens. It was all monochromatic and different sizes and different aspect ratios. And I was just going nuts. And at the same time, it was the 100th anniversary of Little Nemo was coming up. So I ran around to publishers saying, who can do this full size? I was looking at my collection, and every time you pick it up, it starts to deteriorate a little more. And by the 200th anniversary, this stuff is going to be dissolved. So how do we save it? I went to everyone from Fantagraphics to Abrams to art publishers in London and Paris, and everybody says, oh, nice idea, but it really can't be done. So I was in the fortunate and or unfortunate position of knowing knowing exactly what I wanted to do and having no idea what I was doing. But what did help was my ability to use Photoshop. And the friends that I had who said, yes, we'll help you. So publishers and designer friends in Paris who were able to help me. They said, oh, by the way, you don't have to do color separation anymore. I said, really? Because I had no idea how I was going to manage that. He says, yeah, you just create the files and the printer goes right from the PDFs to the plates. that's going to save an awful lot of work, and I thought it was all downhill from there, but it was probably my psyche that was all downhill from there. So it took a lot more work than I thought, not knowing what I was doing, but in a way that was probably a good idea because I didn't look to what had been done before to figure out what needed to be done. I thought about what I wanted to have done and figured out how do I make that happen rather than looking at what had been done before. And in the end, it turned out, and the big difference was that I didn't have to know anything about printing. And I had some friends who knew about publishing and design, and that helped me. And then once I got to the printer, for better or for worse, they were there to help me out and guide me along every step of the way to come up with a book that was as good as anything that a lot of people with more experience were able to do, and the technology certainly helped there.
Well, another part that made Pete's first book and all of his books so successful is it was unique. Pete, the little NEMO book is the same size as the original newsprint. So it's not just the technical ability that he and his friends were able to bring to the project, but they presented it in a fantastic, fantastic, unique format that we all enjoyed. So give yourself credit for that.
Well, I didn't know any better.
And we've all imitated it since.
Absolutely. So Dean, let me ask you a question. Obviously, no?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Oh, okay. All right. So let me ask you a question. Was, 2007 the Library of American Comics as opposed to 1999 as opposed to 2000? What was the timing? What drove?
It was just time for me to get back into comics. I had been out of comics for about 10 years. And it was that simple.
Could you have done those books back in the day?
Absolutely not. Lorraine Turner, our art director, is here. Since she joined the library, we've been able to double our output because she's at least as talented as I am in doing the work.
I heard you were more talented.
More talented, I would
by the
think.
way, but-
No, but back in the 80s when Fantagraphics was doing strips and we were doing strips in NBM and Kitchen, it was all done by hand. I mean, you're cutting ruby lith or you're painting with Grumbacher or opaquing paints, you're masking things out. It's all done manually, and we were relying on color separators who didn't know the material, really. They're color separators who we give these strips to, and they would scan them. And they would have to guess, well, we want to clean this up or clean that up. Now we have the control because of Photoshop. We can do so much more, better work, and more of it.
Okay, that's
The
great.
Photoshop appreciation
I
panel.
was going to say, you should have invited somebody from Adobe.
What's that?
You should have invited somebody from Adobe.
I should have. That's a good point. I can get them to sponsor it.
But it's not just technical knowledge. It's like of Photoshop. You need to know the material, know the artist's work, know when it was published, what it was supposed to look like, because we're often looking at newspaper strips or old comic books that are printed poorly, or printed out of register, or the reds are too heavy, or whatever the case may be. So you need to know the technical Photoshop work, but you need to know how do the artists draw? What colors did they usually use? If you know what syndicate proofs look like, if you have something that was pure, you can compare it to. So there's a lot of disciplines and a lot of knowledge involved in it. You can't just hire somebody to do the work, as we all know.
We've tried.
So I think that's fair. Scott, you probably have an edge in that because the artist editions are original art. You see it as it was intended by the artist, as opposed to being. I mean, obviously you can see it reproduced, but you see it the way it was meant to be.
No, that's true, and it probably gives me a little bit of an edge when I do color corrections on art. I'm generally looking at the art at the same time, so definitely helps rather than looking at really crappy old printings. I picked up a book for a friend on eBay recently. I gave it to him here at the show. It was an old DC House of Mystery book. It had a Frank Robbins story that he had never seen, and he's a big Frank Robbins fan. And it's funny, I almost forgot, and I mean, I loved these comics when I was a kid, but I almost forgot how incredibly badly these things were printed and colored, and I was wondering, I'm looking at it thinking, wow, I was able to, and everyone was able to see through this bad printing and see the quality and the gems that were there. We've definitely come a long way in every way in production and printing.
I want to get back to that in a second, but Eric, I'm fascinated by Peanuts, and sort of if you give us a little background on because the decision to publish the complete Peanuts is a lifetime commitment in many ways. You're talking about 50 years of strips. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that sort of from we want to do this kind of position. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the idea for the complete Peanuts had been floating around for a while. We had published, a number of strip reprint series like Prince Valiant and Pogo and Popeye. And Peanuts was always the holy grail. I mean, I don't remember specifically when we started talking about the complete Peanuts, but I do remember there always being this, like, God, wouldn't it be great to publish Charles Schulz? I mean, Fantagraphics fashions itself as a publisher of great cartoonists. And Charles Schulz was, amongst the greatest. He's on the Mount Rushmore of great cartoonists. And so in the late 1990s, Gary Groth, the publisher of Fantagraphics, had the opportunity to interview Schulz for the Comics Journal. It was for the 300th issue of the Comics Journal, and he wanted to do something special. And you have your kind of holy grail list of people you'd like to interview, and he was on that list. And luckily, he consented to do it. And Gary went down to Santa Rosa and spent a few days with Schulz and interviewed him. He'd interviewed him once before for NEMO magazine in the 80s with Richard Marshall, a noted comics historian. So they had a little bit of a acquaintanceship and a rapport. And I guess they basically just really hit it off when he did this interview. And it was shortly after that they maintained a kind of correspondence and phone relationship, and Gary broached the subject with him. And the funny part is that Schulz's very sincere reaction was, who would want to read that? He literally couldn't fathom that somebody would want to read that, and to that end, he was slightly resistant because I think he felt like it was incredibly self-indulgent for him to okay that. He was a very humble guy. But anyways, Gary can be persuasive and persistent, and he kept pushing him, and finally Schulz said, after a short period of time, he gave him his blessing. He said, okay, you have to cut through the red tape at the Syndicate. This was at the time United Media in New York, and you have to cut through the red tape, but I will do what I can to help make that happen. But you still have to deal with the licensor and the lawyers. And anyways, we had just started to put together a proposal basically when Schulz's cancer came back, and it wasn't too long after that he announced his retirement, and then, as we all know, died on the eve of that last strip being published. And at the time, it was a real, his death was a blow to all of comics, but in terms of the complete Peanuts, we really thought that was it. Like, oh man, we've lost our ally in wanting to make this happen. And basically, long story short, Jeannie Schulz, Charles's widow, she basically said, I'll help you, I'll make this happen. And she did. She was fantastic. Jeannie is amazing. I'm sure everybody on this panel knows that occasionally when you're dealing with heirs of artists, they can be more challenging than dealing with the artists themselves.
Occasionally? Okay.
It's very, very polite and diplomatic.
Yes. Jeannie's the opposite. She really had a legitimate grasp of her husband's stature and his talent and his legacy, and she wanted to see that. She didn't, Schulz drew almost 18,000 Peanut strips, and I would wager fewer than 5,000 of them were ever, collected, or at least ever collected in like the Holt Reinhardt paperbacks we remember from our childhoods. And so she helped push it through, and the rest is history, really. And it's funny because you say it's a lifetime project, and it seemed like it when we started. We really thought like we were going to be doing this for the rest of our lives, and sadly, in Kim Thompson's case, it was true. And now we are almost done. We only have 2 volumes left. And it's kind of amazing. It's just like, it really felt like, we would be doing this until we were ready to retire, and we're not ready to retire, but we're almost done.
It's cool.
So are you planning on doing one complete volume?
Yeah, yeah.
Right, World's Heaviest Book. We'll get
Big damn peanuts.
And I think Peanuts kind of opened the floodgates for a lot of this stuff. It gained a lot of book trade traction. It made, the first volume was on the New York Times bestseller list, not the comics bestseller list, but the bestseller list. And I think it just really legitimized the idea that we could actually do these books.
That is a great segue. My question for Michael is about volume fatigue. And really, I mean, there are now so many books that are in multiple volumes. We are about to print Dick Tracy 17, or we're about to print, I think it's number 17. Certainly the 50 years of Peanuts. There are a number of projects that are probably, I'm going to completely forget, but Complete Crumb is probably at 15, 17 volumes at this point.
17.
Chronicles of Conan, the Marvel material that Dark Horse publishes, I checked, was volume 26. So
There's way too many more to go, too. So
yeah, I don't know. I had stopped reading by then, so I don't know how many more are left. But I mean, it seems, So the question is, you've got to keep publishing these books. We have to find consumers to buy them, and we have to. So talk a little bit about sort of how do you keep the fan from just saying, okay, I'm done. I've got enough.
Okay, first of all, I think a great example of what Dark Horse is doing right now, what Greg is talking about, is creepy and eerie. And we're up in the high teens on both of them. And you can just see the curve bending downwards in terms of sales. It's become fairly predictable. But one interesting thing that I think that's really important to this discussion from more on the business case side is that for the last 12 years I've been working in the book market, and my specific task has been sort of translating sales from the direct market, the comics market, into the greater market, the book world. And I think the acceptance of the book world of graphic novels and a lot of these reprints has really allowed us to do so many of them, because it's really opened it up to a much wider audience. Like Eric said, Peanuts was on the New York Times bestseller list, not the comic or graphic novel bestseller list. But what's been really important, about 10 years ago, everybody was talking about digital, how digital would kill paper publishing. And internally at Dark Horse, a lot of our conversations were, how do we make people want the book? How do we make them want to pick this up and hold it in their hand? Kind of the book as a fetish object. If you look at Taschen, Benedict Taschen publishers, you look at their books, and I don't know about you, but when I see them on the shelf at Powell's in Portland, I have to have them. Yeah, very expensive, but they're beautiful books you can hold in your hand. They have end flaps, they have spot varnish, they have all of the different things that we really like about a lot of these reprint books. But anyway, the acceptance of the book market, and specifically Amazon, and that's not something people really want to talk about or really want to say in the direct market, but Amazon has been an incredible driver of sales of these books, high-priced books that people will buy at a discount. But I really, really think, at least in our case, and I would be surprised if anybody up here would say differently for their books, Amazon's been a huge driver for this. In terms of the fatigue, like Greg said, Marvel's Chronicles of Conan, as we go back and we publish this stuff, we try to think of new ways to package it, because you think Chronicles of Conan 29, who's going to buy that? Why are they going to want that? So then you start thinking about, okay, what artists can we segment out of there and do? Obviously, Barry Windsor Smith, is the most popular, and we've done that hardcover and softcover. And then you think about some of the other artists that have been popular, and other ways to kind of segment it and make a digestible tome. For our Crime Does Not Pay series, that's a book not many people know about. It's very EC-like and very nasty, and really contributed to the Comics Code Authority being created. But one of the things we did with that book is we created a $20 softcover sampler with a number of essays from various historians placing the book in perspective, because our idea was to kind of give people a sampler or a taster for something we were about to embark on, a long series. So, there's various ways to do it, but I think, we're definitely going to face fatigue across the board in the industry in the near future.
Brick and mortar bookstores not necessarily ordering Erie 16 or
Yes.
Creepy,
Yes.
right,
Yeah.
right, sure, I understand that.
The
Let's get-
shelves, and there's so many different sizes and formats, their shelves are not configured to carry them.
Right. Let's get back to the technology and the reproduction for a minute. So interestingly enough, and I think Scott alluded to this earlier, and Dean as well, you can, with technology today, you could scan old comics, and if you really put some energy into it, make them look a heck of a lot better between the pre-press and the actual printing than they ever did in the first place. And that certainly is an option, and some of the publishers and some of the collections here reflect that. But Craig, you like an old school look to your old school comics. And, I've seen a little bit of controversy about that. It's not quite as controversial as, say, the Mideast conflict, but I've definitely seen, and I've seen both sides of the question. Some people saying, well, don't take a 50s comic and make it too bright and shiny, and the other side saying, well, why aren't Blank Book as bright and shiny as Blank Book? So talk about your philosophy on that a little bit, please.
Well, I heard some talk this morning about like, oh, the old comics were badly printed and off register, and I think like, you say that like that's a bad thing, because I really like the aesthetic of. Obviously, Scott shows us in his books how beautiful the original artwork was, and so it's on the one hand, it's great to see that, but I like the aesthetic of the old comic books and how they looked and were off register and printed on newsprint and the color of newsprint, I think it was like good for the eye, it lent a kind of a softness to your reading experience, and as opposed to like a harshness and so I like that look. I like to wear old blue jeans that are faded and a couple holes in them, and you walk into any store now, and that's the kind of jeans they're selling. And you walk into furniture stores, and they got like pre-distressed furniture, and I like
Called the
that.
Salvation Army.
Yeah, I don't like if I get if I at a flea market I buy an old record, but it's still sealed in the plastic, I take it out and I scratch it a little bit before I
You do not.
put it on my turntable.
He likes the sound of frying bacon.
So, on the other hand, Greg, I want to say, like, we actually spend a lot of time to make our comics look bad. So, like, it's not like we do this cavalierly, like,
You're consciously investing a lot of energy in making those comics look as bad as possible.
Craig, I want that to be an ad. Yeah, I want to do that as an ad in your next previews.
The other thing is, anybody who's been in this, in comics since the 80s, and it looks like there's a few of you out there, I would bet have been. A couple of names I'd like to shout out are Ken Pierce and Tony Raiola.
Oh my gosh.
These
Tony's
are two.
here.
Tony's here?
I just saw him two minutes
Tony's
ago.
at every show.
year I go up to Tony's booth. Can I say one quick story?
Sure.
Every year I go up to his booth and I go, thank you for my beautiful wife. Because I met my wife at an Italian comic book convention, and I didn't really know about Italian women, but Tony's Italian. And he goes, and so I went up to him for advice, like, how do I get this girl, So he gave me advice, and I always go in, first thing at the convention, I always go to thank Tony for my wife.
And then Craig took her out to the side and scratched her up a bit. Ripped her clothes.
The Italians were doing this in the 70s.
Yes, exactly. And Tony would be at every show throughout the 80s, and he reprinted a lot of Dick Tracy. And again, the colors were off, but shit, you just bought him. It's like, hey, that's Dick Tracy. There's no other place to get it. And Ken Pierce he was somewhere in the Chicago area. Ken repackaged a lot of different things, but he repackaged Smokey Stover, Bill Holman's, just wonderful strip, and all sorts of other things too.
He did Spirit Dailies too, right?
Pardon?
He did the Spirit Dailies, didn't he?
He did the Spirit
Yeah.
Dailies, yeah.
He did
yeah.
Crazy Cat, he
He
did
did a ton of stuff, but those two guys I really think are our forefathers of this business.
Well, you
Don't
know, but
forget
it goes
Bill
back further than that, because, I
He's
mean,
the godfather.
so the first comic books were reprints of comic strips.
Right.
You know, so like, people talk about this like this is a recent kind of thing and everything, but I mean, the very first comic books before Superman were reprinting Barney Google and
The Spirit? Well, before that.
Well,
right?
yeah.
Well, even before there were comic books, in 1904 and 1905, they were reprinting the comic books in the large 12 by 15 format.
yeah. So like, I mean, the beginnings of the comic book industry are reprints of Sundays.
And they got that whole off-register thing right on, right? I mean, you envy their ability to pull that off, don't
You know,
you?
in terms of fatigue of the number of reprints, there's reprints of so many different types of comic strips, humor strips, adventure strips. I don't think there's any one person who's going to try to buy every single thing that's being published. If you like Peanuts, you may not like Russ Manning's Tarzan. If you're a Rip Kirby fan, you might not want Little Nemo. So there's something for everybody, which is fantastic. In terms of like a long series doing 25, 30 volumes, yes. But in terms of the sheer variety of it, it's such an incredible golden age. When I was younger, and we all were younger, trying to find these things, we could go to comics conventions. Oh, look, I found November 17th. Now I can, 2 years later, you find the next week. There was no way to get an entire collection. So when Greg asked me what was one of the impetuses for me to come back into comics and start doing this, was it took me all of my life to that point to get a complete set of Terry and the Pirates. So then I can present it in 6 volumes, and you can buy the whole Terry and the Pirates right there for $350, or on Amazon for God knows how much cheaper. I'm sorry, gosh knows how much cheaper.
It was the Amazon word that I had trouble with.
No, but that's the point. Is that, so many of the strips and comics that we're all doing collectively, we may have found the only copy that's available for a reprint. I mean, we're doing the Wonder Woman strips. There's one set. Sid Friedberger here is the only person in the entire world that I know who has a complete set of the Silver Age Superman dailies, and that's what we're using for our set. If I didn't meet Sid and Sid didn't collect them, you wouldn't have them. They would never be reprinted. So that's the other value, is that fatigue or not, there are certain things that somebody's a Superman fan or a DC Comics fan, they want that. They're not going to buy Kangaroo or something else that we do, but they want that.
If you publish
It's
that
a
stuff, you get to read them all anyway.
fantastic time to be a comics fan.
But, Pete, that's a good question. I mean, some of the strips that you publish are just so beyond rare that I can't. I mean, did you own most of those, or have you gone out?
I did early on, and that sort of opened up my interest to find out about more things. And the last book, which took a couple of years of digging, had things that I've been collecting strips for 45 years, things that I've never seen, didn't know existed, and a lot of other people, including some pretty good historians, just had not uncovered the same amount of stuff before.
That's one of my favorite ones. I love that. I mean, the stuff in it that I've never seen before.
Yeah, and anyone here interested, we'll plug the next panel at 3 o'clock today. We're going to do all the really origins, the old stuff. But it started with my own collection, and then I realized there's stuff that even I don't have that still needs to be preserved, especially because if I don't have it, most other people don't have it. Now, it's pretty common to find good collections of Terry and the Pirates or even Little Nemo, but some of this stuff is just incredibly hard when it was done only in one newspaper.
Sure, and again, surprisingly, things that are super popular brands that we've had trouble with, whether it's Archie or even some of the DC stuff, to Dean's point. Let me take a quick, because we're going faster than I thought, let me take a quick moment to talk a little bit more about modern reprint collections, because that's another, as far as I'm concerned, it's another phenomenon, is the fact that we're able to take more modern books, including books that are printed in recent years, and just really give them the super deluxe treatment. There are versions as an industry of the Taschen type treatments that they do in art books. So particularly, Scott, I want to talk about absolute editions for two seconds if we can, because I love the oversized reprints of modern comics. I particularly think, again, even though modern comics are printed so much better, once you start opening them up a little bit and you start seeing more detail in the artwork and everything breathes a little bit better in that larger format. So at DC/Wildstorm, you and another famous comic book person created the Absolute editions.
Yeah, the John Lehman, who does Chew, used to be an editor at Wildstorm when I was editor-in-chief there. And we would get occasionally French albums that would reprint some of our work. You know, in particular, Travis Charest did Wildcats X-Men, which is just a beautiful piece of work. Not the greatest story in the world, but a great piece of work artistically. And we got these comps from France of these oversized hardcover books, and they were just tremendous. And you know, we thought, why don't we just steal that and steal the format and do oversized hardcovers, but make them bigger, just make them thicker, have more material. You know, instead of doing just a 48-pager, which was sort of the norm, 48, 60, 56, 64, do something that would be, you know, 200, 250 pages. And it met with a lot of resistance. You know, people at DC were thinking, well, this has never been done in this. I play the bongos too. They were very resistant because it hadn't been done before, and we just thought, well, why not try it? So I think the first one was Planetary, and you know, we were insisted. They at first they wanted to be on newsprint paper, and we said, no, absolutely not. It has to be on really a nice high quality stock, and so we were able to do it, and it was met very successfully. You know, and now it's become sort of a wider thing across the industry. And it's kind of funny, you know, John and I came up with the idea, and you know, we've always thought of it as just a format. So when people say that we created it, we just kind of smile, you know, because honestly, it's a French format that we just changed a little bit.
Cool. All right, so I know we're running a little short of time. What I'd like to do is, I have a couple more questions for these guys, but I want to make sure we get some audience questions in because I did not do a good job of that yesterday. So let me open it up to the audience really quickly. I have a question from our gentleman from the press.
You talk about the fatigue, and when you're up to like a volume 29 or whatever you're up to, someone's discovering that's the book they discovered for the first time, and they're like, oh, I want to see volume 1, but volume 1 5, 10 years out of print. What are you guys doing to try to bring them back over time, or is there an ability, is the market there to reprint some of these earlier volumes?
We generally try to keep everything in print. You know, and the Conan, that's an extreme example. But for example, the Creepy and Eerie, we try to keep those in print, and certainly the first 3 or 4. And you know, any publisher will tell you to sell the subsequent volumes, you really need to have those early ones in print. So it's all part of managing your list, that you keep those in print. The other thing I suggest is that, you know, at some point we'll go to trade paperback for just about every series that's in a $50 hardcover. You know, we'll put out a $25 to $30 soft cover.
So Eric, I'm curious, is Fantagraphics pretty good about keeping the older volumes in print?
Well, yeah,
I've seen a few misses now and then for my own personal collection.
It's kind of like what Michael just said. You know, with something like the Complete Peanuts, we definitely try to keep all of them in print, and for the most part, we're able to because they sell well enough. And that's kind of what it boils down to. I mean, there might be gaps where something's unavailable for 6 months, but you know, when you've got a 23-volume series, you know, you're going to have little moments where something's unavailable. But we do try, especially the first. You know, you want to keep the first few volumes in print always. But reprints are very expensive, and the profit margin on them is generally slimmer than the first printings, because it's not often that you're printing more the second time around of you know, volume 12 of the Complete Peanuts or whatever. So it's just you know, Michael used the word, you know, managing your list, and that's all it is. It's like you're figuring out what you can do relative to everything else you're doing as a publisher and what fits into your, you know, your cash flow. and you do your best. But I do think that it's crucially important to keep as much of it in print at any given time as you can. But then there are other series that just don't sell well enough, and you can't justify it, and it pisses people off.
I will say, we've spent a lot of time, energy, and money trying to get better at that, and since I knew I was going to mention Dick Tracy, Dean will be happy to hear that all 17 volumes are in print as of now. I can't say that for every series we have.
Right.
Question right there. Yeah.
I want to say thank you for all the time and effort to go in these wonderful collections. They're just, I just love each of them from all of your companies. But my question was, would the panelists be able to tell us about an upcoming project that they're most excited about?
Yeah, that was part of the mix. Was sort of I wanted to close with an announcement from everybody that that we might hear about here for the first time. You want to do that now, or you want to do a couple more questions and do it right at the end?
He's got a question over here.
Well, let's do. We will come back to that as soon as they're down. They give me that 1 minute sign. Go.
I got a question for you guys. Where do you get your material at this point? I know of a Kickstarter that was fan-initiated of Nelvana in the North, which I think one of your companies has picked up. I know of fans who have done books and pitched them to your companies, but where do you guys find your upcoming projects?
Everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's honestly, I think, we're presented by editors, by collectors, by fans. Hey, why don't you guys do this? And as people that are all fans in the business, we all have our own ideas of things we'd like to see in print. There's a rumor that a few series that Dark Horse does are because Mike Richardson liked them as a kid. That wouldn't surprise me, because there's a few series that we do that I liked as a kid or Scott liked as a kid. And so there's
Well, I proposed a series at Dark Horse on a strip or a comic book reprint that's near and dear to my heart. My wife and I have had collies all our lives, and I put together a huge proposal for reprinting the whole Lassie comic series. And
By Matt Baker.
Matt Baker did the most insane painted covers, and I got shot down. So any of you guys up here want to talk?
I think my wife votes yes, by the way, on Lassie Comics. Question over here.
Do you guys know the existence of or plans for anything to reprint maybe some of these one-panel strips like Out Our Way or Our Boarding House?
One of us will get to it.
What's that?
There are some Out Our Way collections out there, some older ones, yeah.
Yeah, again, I think like Dean said, I don't know if you heard, he wasn't too close to Mike. We'll all get to it. We're pretty excited. I think it's gone to press, or please believe it or not, or just about to go to press. Yeah, we're pretty excited about that, because that, again, material that, particularly the old ones, you would really have to search high and low to really see that material, and it's much of this stuff comes from their archives, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of great one panels, as you know, single panel cartoons. And I'm sure the best ones one of us, or all of us will get to them eventually. It's just that selling a continuity strip, a comic strip, is easier for us at this point.
There's so many, I all have personal things, like we all have our Lassies. There's so many great
There's another quote.
We have to decide how much money we want to lose.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, there's some great stuff out there that just has no commercial value whatsoever.
By the way, let me before I answer the next question, let me give credit to, it's a little bit self-congratulatory, but obviously to the other publishers as well. But you raise a really good point. A lot of these books, the goal is not to make a lot of money. The goal is to not lose money, because we want to see these books in print. We love the material. We know some of you love the material. Many of you don't know it, because you haven't seen it or you're not familiar with it. But we, as publishers, we look at this and we go, this is a great opportunity to take advantage of the technology, and to take advantage of really the tools that we have that we never had before, to present these things. And trust me, it breaks my heart when I see sometimes the interest in something that I think is great is not there. But that being said, we're committed to doing it. And I know I'm speaking for everybody, because I
got a letter from Robert Crumb a while back, and he said, "How the fuck do you make any money on these things?" And then in the next sentence is, "Could you please do a full-size, full-color, complete collection of the Bungle family?"
Right. Question back there.
I love the physical look of all your books, like the complete Peanuts on the shelf is like amazing. And Craig Yoe, like the Sponsier books on the shelf. My question with Peter, where the hell are you supposed to put your books? They're too big for any person.
Well, the suggestion I tell people is you slide them under your sofa in the living room, and every Sunday morning you slide them out, and you read a couple pages on the floor and slide them back in.
All right, question in the front here?
Is there any material only available on microfiche, and if so?
Oh, boy.
Sometimes it feels that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question, when we did the first Archie book, those original Montana strips, I don't remember, but I'm going to say a dozen were impossible to find anywhere, clip strips and anything, and we worked with the microfiche. So, yeah, and I'm sure there are probably other runs that have.
And microfiche was probably a great invention for libraries, but it was a terrible invention for comic strip reprinting.
I think microfiche was a great invention for the company of microfiche, and that was about it.
All right, I start gentleman over here.
Yes, my parents were big collectors of the classics, illustrated comic books. Do you know if such a collection exists nowadays?
Boy,
NBM is printing them, is still publishing them.
Because the only time I've ever seen those, I've seen the originals. They're usually not so good collections or not so good condition. So I was curious if there was such a collection.
Yeah, I don't know, has NBM done any deluxe collections of the old
I
ones?
think, like Eric said, NBM is doing them. I see them at the library shows, the American Library Association. There was some small publisher was doing them. I don't know if they were viable.
NBM has done a number of the original old ones from, was it Dell or whomever, and then they've also reprinted a number of the ones that, there was was it you in the 80s that did the new ones, like the Bill Sienkiewicz, Moby Dick, and...
Oh, that was first.
First, and then Acclaim had them for a while.
Yeah.
Because I sort of got there at the end of that sort of run at it.
Go to NBM in row 1700 and ask them.
Peter Cooper's The Jungle was amazing.
I'm going to do one more question, and then we're going to do our announcements. I don't know, Lorraine. Again,
I'm going to ask a Peter question.
Okay.
Because I do what you guys do. I just want to ask you, because Dean will call this the woo-woo factor. But when you work on this, do you ever feel a spiritual connection, or do you feel the artist sort of pushing your intuition? Because I get this feeling sometimes when I'm doing this reproduction work that I am working for an artist that could be standing right next to me. But I feel like I'm working and helping bring and preserve their work for all of you. So that's my question. Do you ever get that inspiration that you feel like the artist is like right there with you?
Sometimes the inspiration I feel is that the 6-year-old kid who was reading the comics in 1919 is sitting there with me saying, this is what I love, to sit on the floor and I love to dive into this stuff. And sometimes I identify more with the audience than I do with the author.
Sometimes I feel like the cartoonists are kind of looking over my shoulder and saying, you're making my stuff look bad.
All right, so that'll be our final question, but I sort of did promise the announcements. I don't know if everybody did come with one. I know Scott came with one, so I'll start with him. Go ahead.
We will be releasing sometime early next year the second volume of the Best of EC Artist Edition, and that will be the same format. It'll be 15 by 22 inches. Stories, all the stories scanned from the originals. It'll include things like Airburst by Harvey Kurtzman, Master Race by Craig Steen, also another Craig Steen story called In the Bag that I like a lot, Food for Thought by Al Williamson, and a number of others.
Great. Eric?
I don't have a new announcement per se, but probably our most eagerly awaited classic reprint of the last couple of years has been the next volume in our Pogo series. And just last week, after a 1-year delay and 2 years since the last volume, I sent the third volume to press, and I brought a little mock-up of it here. So it's actually happening.
That's good. I'll come back to Dean. Dean, what have you got?
No big announcements that haven't been announced, but I want to plug LOAC Essentials. It's a little odd format book series we're doing this size. You flip it and you read one daily at a time. And each book contains a year's worth of strips. The latest one is The Bungle Family, which Pete mentioned. It's such an unknown strip and one of the greatest comic strips ever done.
Probably the
And
most contemporary,
Yeah.
Yeah, it really
classic
holds up.
strip
And
ever.
the whole idea of the Lorac Essentials, you can buy at a reasonable, like $25, you can buy a whole year's worth of a strip and sample it, of things that are essential to have in a library of newspaper strip collections.
All right, they're chasing us. Pete, what do you got?
Chronologically, I'll have the next group and the full-size reprints, and this one will cover the strips from 1915 to 1930, and it'll be Screwball Families, Working Girls, and the creation of the sitcom.
Great. Mike?
Quickly, Central Kurtzman Library. We've announced some of the books, the components of it, but we will be collecting as much as we can of Harvey's work.
That's very exciting stuff, too. Craig?
I'm really excited because we do a lot of reprints of horror comics and
Horror comic?
horror comics.
3 R's.
And that's my Midwest accent. Sorry. But a guy named Mike Howlett has collected all the Erie publications from the best of Erie, the book is called The Worst of Erie, much to Greg's chagrin. But I'm excited because for Yoe Books, it's an important step because I didn't do this book. So I've often wanted to stop just me doing all the books and start having collectors come and do books for us. So
Okay, we're about to get the hook, Craig. There you go. I never actually got the hook. All right, real quick, so I did promise this. I just like the person who asked about microfiche, just because I like the word, getting the word microfiche in here. Is that you? There you go.